To find any footprints at such high altitude was simply inexplicable. They didn't look like the footprints of a man, a bear, or a yak, but the Sherpas knew exactly what they were: Yeti footprints.
For generations, legendary explorers swore something enormous walked the roof of the world. Frozen footprints twice the size of a boot. A monastery scalp nobody could explain. Hair samples that stumped scientists for years.
These pictures are just, as far as the Yeti is concerned, what the army says is the Yeti, the so-called Yeti. So far, only footprints have been found, which is fine, but there has to be much more evidence.
Sir Edmund Hillary went looking for proof himself. The Indian Army claimed they'd found its tracks, but the strongest answer science has produced came not from the mountain, but from painstaking lab analysis of the very specimens believers had collected. And it reshapes the story. The DNA study that changed everything. That scientist was Charlotte Lindqvist, a biologist at the University at Buffalo who specializes in species genetics. In 2013, a production company approached her with an unusual offer: help test DNA from objects believed to be Yeti remains for a television special. She agreed, partly because she was far more interested in what the samples could reveal about real, endangered Himalayan bears than in chasing a cryptid. Over the following years, Lindqvist and her team assembled the most thorough genetic survey the Yeti legend had ever received. 9 specimens for the initial published study, later expanded to 24 samples of hair, bone, skin, teeth, and even feces, gathered from museums, zoos, and private collections across the Himalayas and Tibetan Plateau. The results, published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B, were about as clear as science gets. One sample turned out to be from a dog. Every other sample matched local bears: the Asian black bear, the Himalayan brown bear, or the Tibetan brown bear. What surprised many people wasn't that the samples belonged to bears. It was just how consistently they did. The team tested specimens collected from different countries, different elevations, and from people who had all insisted they came from completely different encounters with the Yeti. Yet the genetic evidence kept circling back to the same familiar animals. That pattern told scientists something important. Instead of one mysterious species leaving traces across the Himalayas, it appeared that generations of witnesses had been encountering ordinary wildlife under extraordinary circumstances. In freezing temperatures, thin air, poor visibility, and unfamiliar terrain, the line between the ordinary and the unbelievable can become remarkably thin. There was no unclassified ape, no mysterious hybrid, no polar bear connection at all. Lindqvist's team even used the data to assemble the first complete mitochondrial genomes ever recorded for the Himalayan brown bear and black bear, turning a monster hunt into a genuine conservation breakthrough for 2 vulnerable species. Lindqvist herself put it plainly afterward. As far as she was concerned, the mystery of the Yeti was now solved. Not by a blurry photograph, not by a legend passed down through a monastery, by cold, methodical genetics. It's worth being precise about what that actually proved, though the study didn't confirm no Yeti has ever existed anywhere, only that every single physical sample anyone had ever managed to collect, test, and hand over to a lab turned out to belong to something ordinary. The physical evidence that reached modern laboratories kept pointing back to animals science already knew, especially bears. There was a quieter, more meaningful discovery hiding inside all that data too. Lindqvist pointed out that Himalayan brown bears are highly endangered, and Asian black bears aren't far behind, yet almost nothing was known about their genetic history before this project. A hunt built entirely around a mythical creature ended up producing some of the most detailed genetic maps ever assembled for 2 real vulnerable species, proof that even a century of chasing a legend can leave behind something scientifically useful. The film crew who had originally funded the work, hoping for headlines about a monster, reportedly took the news of ordinary bears with good humor. Science, after all, is science. So if the physical evidence kept leading back to bears, why does the legend keep refusing to die? The footprints that started it all. It began, as so many good mysteries do, with a photograph. In the autumn of 1951, British mountaineer Eric Shipton was scouting a route up Mount Everest with his colleague Michael Ward when the pair stumbled across something strange pressed into the snow near the Menlung Glacier. A line of massive human-like footprints, each one roughly 12 to 13 inches long, cutting straight across the ice at nearly 16,000 feet. Shipton did what any smart explorer would do. He placed an ice axe beside the print for scale and snapped a photo. That single image detonated across the globe. Newspapers in Europe and America ran it under breathless headlines. A mistranslation of a local phrase gave the creature its Western nickname, the Abominable Snowman. What made Shipton's photograph so powerful wasn't just the size of the prints, it was the timing. The world had entered an era when Everest was becoming the ultimate prize. Newspapers were hungry for dramatic mountain stories, and readers couldn't get enough of tales from places that still felt completely untouched by modern civilization. The Yeti arrived at exactly the right moment. Suddenly, every expedition heading into the Himalayas wasn't just chasing a summit anymore. It was chasing a legend. Some climbers openly admitted they spent almost as much time scanning distant ridgelines for strange movement as they did watching the weather. Even those who dismissed the Yeti as folklore couldn't resist asking Sherpas whether they'd ever seen the creature. Before long, the mystery had become part of the Everest experience itself, almost like an unofficial rite of passage. Their Sherpa guide, the soon-to-be legendary Tenzing Norgay, told the men he had no doubt at all these were Yeti tracks. He even claimed there were two kinds, one that ate yaks and one that ate men. He admitted, though, that he had never actually seen one himself. 2 years later, Hillary and Tenzing would make history atop Everest. But the mountain had already planted a different obsession in Hillary's mind, one that would pull him back to Nepal for an entirely different kind of summit. By 1954, the frenzy had a full expedition behind it. The Daily Mail funded a search team dedicated purely to finding proof. And it was that team who first laid eyes on what looked like the ultimate smoking gun, a strange conical scalp kept for generations inside a remote monastery. Could this be the piece of evidence that finally settled things? And Shipton's photographs weren't even the first hint of something strange in the snow. Back in 1937, mountaineer Frank Smythe had photographed his own set of oversized prints, later attributed to a bear. That same year, explorer John Hunt and his Sherpa companion Pasong came across tracks near the Zemu Gap that they too believed belonged to a pair of Yetis. In 1944, a traveler named C.R. Cook and his wife found enormous prints in soft mud, so large that porters laid down a pair of sunglasses beside them just to capture the scale. Piece by piece, these scattered reports built the same legend from different corners of the mountains, long before any single photograph made headlines. Then came a wealthy American oilman named Tom Slick, who spent a small fortune between 1957 and the early 60s funding dedicated Yeti hunting missions. One of his expeditions even collected supposed Yeti droppings in 1959, hoping fecal analysis might reveal a parasite unique to an undiscovered creature. It was a clever idea, but like everything else collected in those years, it would eventually need real laboratory scrutiny to mean anything at all. The relics that fooled the world. The scalp lived at Kumjung Monastery, and locals had guarded it for what they said were centuries. It was dark, cone-shaped, about a foot across, and unlike anything the monks could otherwise identify. Along with it came whispers of a second relic, a mummified Yeti hand locked away at Pangboche. Hillary wasn't satisfied with second-hand reports. In 1960, Fresh off his Everest triumph, he mounted an entirely new expedition with one goal: get that scalp examined by real scientists. After careful negotiation with the monastery, he was granted permission to fly it to Paris, Chicago, and London for laboratory analysis, but only for 1 month, and only if it came back. Even before Hillary's trip, the very same scalp had already been picked apart once during the 1954 Daily Mail expedition. Anatomy expert Frederick Wood Jones examined its hair under a microscope, comparing it against bears and orangutans. His conclusion was almost stranger than a confirmed monster would have been. He decided the hairs didn't match any known ape or bear, yet he was also convinced the object wasn't actually a scalp at all. No known animal, he argued, grew a ridge of hair running the exact path this one did, from forehead to the nape of the neck. It was, in his professional opinion, likely something else entirely, reshaped and repurposed. By the time Hillary's own analysis came back in 1960, the picture had firmed up considerably. Researchers compared the hair to known Himalayan animals and found it closely matched, and likely came from the skin of a sero, a goat-like creature native to the mountains, suggesting the relic may have been fashioned from an animal that had nothing to do with any Yeti. The Yeti hand fared no better in the eyes of skeptics. A photo analysis suggested it was largely a human hand, bound together with wire, hidden among genuine animal bones to make it harder to dismiss outright. Hillary, who had spent months and real money chasing the legend, walked away skeptical about the whole hunt. He told reporters flatly that he had never believed the snowman existed in the first place, and his own expedition had done nothing to change his mind. And yet, for all that debunking, one crucial question was left completely untouched. If the relics were fakes, and the footprints could be explained away by melting snow, where had the story even come from in the first place? To answer that, the trail didn't lead deeper into the mountains. It led backward into centuries of Sherpa memory, where the legend was born. Long before Shipton ever lifted his camera, the Yeti already had a home in Himalayan spiritual life, and it wasn't as a monster. Local tradition traces the legend back roughly 350 years, to a holy man named Sangwa Dorje, who is said to have lived alone in a cave near the village of Pangboche in full view of Everest. According to the story, Sangwa Dorje wanted total solitude for his meditation, and friendly Yetis supposedly helped him survive, bringing food, water, and fuel. When one of these creatures eventually died, the Lama is said to have kept its scalp and hand as sacred keepsakes, relics that would end up at the very center of the 20th century scientific hunt. In Tibetan Buddhism, the Yeti wasn't purely a beast of horror. It was considered an animal spiritually advanced enough to occasionally follow religious teachings, sometimes even becoming a helper to holy figures. Seeing one, though, was still treated as an omen, usually a bad one, requiring the witness to make amends. The legend reached Western eyes for the first time in 1832 when a journal published trekker B. H. Hodgson's account of his Nepal guides spotting a tall, bipedal, dark-haired creature that fled at the sight of them. Hodgson guessed it was simply an orangutan. More large footprint reports trickled in through the following century. In 1899, in the 1930s, in the 1940s, always secondhand, always tantalizing, never conclusive. Locals themselves had never actually used the name Abominable Snowman. That label was born from a translation mix-up when a journalist misread a Sherpa phrase describing the creature and turned it into something far catchier for Western newspapers. Sherpas instead spoke of several distinct beings folded into the wider legend, among them the Chu-Te, often linked to langur monkeys living lower on the slopes, and the Dzu-Te, a name closely tied to the Himalayan red bear. To local communities, in other words, Yeti was never one single mystery animal. It was a category stitched together from centuries of encounters with several very real, very different creatures of the high mountains. So the Yeti wasn't invented by tabloid reporters or thrill-seeking mountaineers. It was inherited, a spiritual guardian turned into a cryptid, centuries of folklore repackaged for a Western audience obsessed with conquering the world's tallest peaks. But belief and folklore are one thing. Could actual hard science ever catch up to the myth? Science finally steps in. For decades, the Yeti question sat in an awkward limbo. Plenty of stories, almost no testable evidence. That changed in 2014, when Oxford geneticist Brian Sykes decided to put the legend under a microscope, literally. Sykes gathered hair samples supposedly linked to Yeti sightings and ran them through genetic analysis, drawing intense media attention along the way. His conclusions sounded almost more exciting than the myth itself. One sample appeared to match ancient polar bear DNA, hinting that the Yeti might actually be some undiscovered hybrid, part brown bear, part polar bear, roaming an isolated pocket of the Himalayas. The idea spread fast, but the scientific community wasn't fully convinced. Other researchers who tried to replicate the polar bear match came up empty, finding instead that the samples were consistent with ordinary brown bears. Critics argued Sykes had worked from a limited slice of DNA and drawn conclusions that outran his data. So the mystery wasn't solved. It had simply evolved. Now there were two competing stories: an ordinary, if elusive, Himalayan bear or a genuinely unclassified hybrid species hiding in the mountains. And skeptics outside the DNA debate weren't shy about weighing in either. Longtime paranormal investigator James Randi had already pointed out for years that convincing ape and gorilla costumes had fooled audiences in films for decades, and that any population of large, breeding Yetis would need enough individuals to sustain a gene pool awfully hard to hide in terrain that mountaineers were now climbing every single season. Others clung to a different, more romantic theory entirely: that the Yeti might be a surviving relative of Gigantopithecus, a genuinely real giant extinct ape that once roamed Asia. It was a thrilling idea, tying the legend to actual paleontology instead of pure folklore. There was even a case for misidentification instead of mythology altogether. The snow leopard, one of the most elusive big cats on the planet, moves through the same terrain, leaves tracks that can look strange to an untrained eye, and is rarely spotted by even experienced travelers. In poor visibility at high altitude, exhausted climbers have plenty of reasons to mistake something ordinary for something extraordinary. But thrilling and true are not the same thing, and every one of these theories shared the exact same weakness. None of them had ever been tested against real, physical DNA. Untangling which explanation actually held up would take a far bigger, far more rigorous study, and a scientist willing to go through the evidence one genome at a time. So, why won't the legend die? You would think a peer-reviewed genetic study would be the final word. It wasn't even close. In April of 2019, the Indian Army's official Twitter account announced that a mountaineering expedition team had spotted mysterious footprints belonging to the mythical beast, Yeti, near Makalu Base Camp, measuring a staggering 32 by 15 inches. The post claimed the creature had only ever been sighted in that same national park before, and it came with photographs, an air of military authority, and instantly went worldwide. The scientific response was swift and largely unimpressed. Skeptics pointed out that the prints ran in an oddly straight, single-file line, more consistent with a bear's natural walking pattern where the hind foot lands inside the front footprint than anything bipedal. Experts also noted a well-documented phenomenon called track enlargement, where sun, wind, and melting snow can widen an ordinary print until it looks nothing like its original size, exaggerating its length and width far beyond whatever actually made it. One conservation researcher at the University of Kent was blunt about the whole episode. calling it wildly unlikely that a mythical anthropoid was wandering the snow-capped mountains, and noting that institutions with real scientific credibility ought to think twice before slapping a legendary name on an ordinary set of tracks. No hair, no droppings, no follow-up DNA. Just photographs, official military branding, and a headline that, for a few days, made the Yeti feel real again. Even genetic researchers who'd already closed the book years earlier weren't surprised the story caught fire anyway. One of the scientists behind the earlier hair sample studies remarked afterward that you simply cannot kill a legend with anything as mundane as facts. And he had a point, because in the years since, the pattern hasn't changed. Trekking companies in Tibet and Nepal still build entire tour itineraries around Yeti folklore, ushering curious travelers past the Menlung Glacier, Pangboche Monastery, and gift shops stocked with Yeti souvenirs and themed cafes. Guides will tell you matter-of-factly that while there's no confirmed scientific evidence for the creature, the legend is still very much part of what makes the mountains worth visiting. And maybe that's the actual answer to why this legend refuses to fade. It isn't really about the evidence anymore. It survives because the Himalayas are still vast enough, still unmapped enough, to make people want to believe something bigger is out there. It survives because tourism boards, documentary crews, and yes, YouTube channels know that definitely just a bear doesn't pull views the way unexplained mystery does. The DNA said bear, the culture said legend, and the legend, it turns out, doesn't need to win the argument to keep on living. So there it is, decades of footprints, relics, and DNA swabs pointing to an answer far more grounded than anyone wanted. Bears, folklore, and a world eager to believe in something wild. Science has explained nearly every clue handed over so far, but the Himalayas haven't stopped whispering. If you love this one, stick around. Our next video uncovers a mystery just as strange, with a twist that might surprise you even more. See you there!